What makes a good boss fight? As we speak, From Software is fighting its own boss fight. There's a huge possibility of Sony buying their parent company and destroying the greatest studio of our time. But hopefully that won't come true, so let's talk about something else. Let's talk about something cheerful. The greatest From Software boss fight since Demon Souls. Not all bosses are equal. You can just slap a fancy health bar and boost the stats of an enemy to make it a boss. There are a lot of examples of this design choice in many Souls and Souls-likes. But we're after the good boss fights today. A well-balanced, challenging difficulty, combined with properly telegraphed attacks, character design that is backed up with a detailed original lore along with proper boss arena and soundtrack can turn any boss fight into a masterpiece. This isn't a ranking, I just talk about the bosses I like in random order. I mean, how are you going to compare this guy to this? Entirely different concepts. They both do their respective parts flawlessly, but one is more action-packed than the other. So go ahead and post your own ranking down in the comments and even add an extra boss or two. But now, like the video, share it with your grandma and let's go. Let's go. Okay. I know my nostalgia thinks Gale is the greatest boss, but I will go with Mesmer. No matter how you look at it, it is a flawless fight. Arena is simple yet gorgeous, the soundtrack by itself reveals so much lore about the character. Voice acting is so stoic and one of the best in Soul history. The design, moveset, everything is simply perfect. We don't know much about Mesmer's lore, but his past is full of tragedy. He played a major role in Marika's revenge plot against an absurdly powerful faction. He defeated and destroyed the Hornsent civilization, who were genocidal maniacs capturing and experimenting on anyone they saw inferior, and yeah, they saw everyone else inferior, so quite a dangerous group of people. Mesmer did everything in his power to avenge his mother's village. He tried to cure shamans who were tortured at the hands of Hornsent, but in the end, no matter what he did, he was abandoned by his mother. Despite the harsh betrayal and his tragic past, Mesmer conquered the serpents infesting his mind and his body. The root of blasphemy was crushed and turned into a tool under Mesmer's unbreakable will. Mesmer's fight is a masterpiece. You can feel that he is full of different emotions throughout the fight, especially when he reveals his true nature in his second phase. The music splits into two entirely different tracks. Both soundtracks constantly try to take over as Mesmer is split between rage, sorrow, blasphemy and loyalty. But at least in his last breath, he earns his happy ending when he finally breaks free from his mother's shackles. With barely any lore, From Software manages to fill a fight with so much emotion. Also, the fight itself is one of the best when you look at it from the technical perspective. Mesmer has so many different attacks. Regardless of the distance and the situation, Mesmer responds with a different attack that fits the moment perfectly. Massive explosions, multiple entirely different gap closes with different timings, delayed attacks instantly switching into quick attacks, evading Mesmer turns into a minigame by itself. And the second phase is just a cinematic masterpiece. The way snakes appear, the way they all attack in harmony, it is just perfect. I can talk about Mesmer all day, but I think I made it clear he is my favorite. I can say that I would pretty much rank all the bosses in the list 9 out of 10 or some even 10 out of 10, but I will slightly favor Mesmer. It is without a doubt absolute masterpiece and I can't wait to see more bosses like this. When I look at Ishin's encounter, I can't think of a single flaw in his design. Ishin is there in Sekiro's journey almost right from the start. He is the one who gave Sekiro his name. He is a grandfatherly figure who pulled Sekiro from the aimless life of a shinobi. Without Ishin, Sekiro follows the path of Shura and brings hell to the innocent lives of Ashina. Both characters are essential to each other's existence. Ishin's description reads, "All his life, Ishin sought opponents whom he could face in battle to the death. It would be foolish to believe that his thirst could be sated in memory. When Ishin is brought back to his prime, he is filled with joy. He will finally meet the end he always wished for, and his satisfying defeat will come from his student and his friend Sekiro. Setting is already great and boss fight only gets better. If you don't include the Genichiro fight before, Ishin has 3 phases. He doesn't fight like a mindless boss, he acts based on your actions without cheesy input reads. He will stop his attack to block an incoming strike just like the player. player. He will delay attacks, he will change moves on the go. Once he takes the first finishing blow, Ishin pulls out a spear. His moveset changes drastically. Now he is wielding both a katana and a spear. He changes between slow devastating spear attacks and quick katana slashes. He can do massive AoE attacks and some thrust attacks. And come on, let's not forget about the Glock 19 he pulls out of nowhere. The attack I like the most is his Estus Punish. Most of the modern bosses have a way to punish healing. Some are so bad that they will never hit you. Some are so effective that if you don't run halfway across the arena, you will get hit regardless. But Ishin is different. When Ishin initiates his punish attack, you have about half a second to deflect the incoming attack. Not only is it fair, but also you can use healing to bait attacks. Third phase becomes a cinematic masterpiece. Ishin will hit you with everything he has, and there are so many different attacks that you have to keep track of. Here's the thing, normally when a Souls boss has this many attacks, playstyle doesn't change all that much. Timing might be a little different, but you're still just dodging and attacking in turns. It's like a glorified turn-based combat. But this is not the case with Ishin. You have to use every single mechanic you learned up until this point in the game. If you see a thrust attack, you have to Mikiri counter. He will sheath his sword to unleash devastating quick draws just like one of the earlier mini-bosses. There you need to watch his hand and deflect as soon as you see his katana reflecting the light. He will go for lightning attacks, you need to jump and deflect. Also, I should add there are at least 3 different ways you can deflect his lightning. You can jump and deflect, you can use Mist Raven, or you can use Sakura Dance. In the Ishin fight, there's no idle moment. Even when you're on the defense, you actively deflect and inflict posture damage. Ishin shows what From Software is capable of when they are not limited by the tough balancing of dozens of weapons and spells. And I can only hope to see another fight as flawless as Ishin's encounter. Have you ever looked at a baby and said, wow, this baby is kinda not cute at all? I found myself in that situation a couple times, but anyways, orphan of course is the kind of newborn only a mother could love, but even that might not be true. But how come an ugly, loud, annoying newborn is one of the best bosses in Bloodborne? I guess Miyazaki can make anything work. Every Souls game needs at least one overly difficult boss, and this one fills the gap perfectly. Though I must say, most of his difficulty comes from being impatient and trading unnecessary hits. Orphan of course is a great enemy. I always enjoy some savage, aggressive bosses. The fact that Orphan constantly attacks with such destructive force makes his fight so much fun. If you ignore the constant screaming, each attack has an incredible design behind it. Orphan, being a newborn that crawled out of a squid like 20 seconds ago, naturally doesn't have a battle plan. He constantly swings his weapon, whatever that thing is, and this is what makes his design stand out. You don't always fight bosses past their prime. This time you fight a boss with 0 experience, purely relying on its instincts. There is something I absolutely love about this fight. When you look at the endgame or DLC bosses in From Software games, they are often set up for some over-the-top legendary encounters. Like that one time you fight the Father of Abyss in his lair, or the time you fight the strongest warrior in existence at the end of time, or fighting 2 demigods at the gates of divinity. Okay, I think I made my point. This isn't the case with Orphan. In the middle of nowhere you stumble across a carcass. Something hostile crawls out of it and its survival instincts render you as a predator. You fight one of the strongest beings in existence, but there's no audience, there's no motivation, there's no glory in it. You both just fight to survive. Orphan's attacks are chaotic and brutal. He screams all the time, lightning bolts hit the ground and send shockwaves, but among all this chaos, a calming sense rises from the simplicity of the fight. With the beautiful boss area, perfect difficulty, unique and interesting design, Orphan is one of the best bosses From Software has ever created. Dark Souls trilogy couldn't have a better ending, and Gale plays a major role in this story. His lore is one of the best. He was alive and fighting since the dawn of humanity. As an enslaved soldier with no control over his fate, he fought unspeakable horrors at the front lines. He overcame the undead curse, he won countless battles for thousands of years, and eventually he earned his freedom when there were no more enemies. And his heroic story didn't even end there. Together with the painter, in order to create a world away from Gwyn Sin and the Age of Fire. He traveled the entire world, fought until the end of time. His sword was broken after thousands of years of clashing. His crossbow got all rusty due to the bloodstains of his enemies. But at the end of time, in Ring City, he collected just enough Dark Soul to help Painter. He lost his sanity in the process, but his mission was done. If the Ashen One could beat him, he would complete the Dark Soul and create a golden opportunity for the Painter. Setting is already perfect. At the end of time, the world is covered in ashes. Two of the strongest warriors in the world of Dark Soul clash to seal the fate of humanity. In order to build a new peaceful world, one of the great warriors has to die. Arena is also perfect. You see the downfall, Age of Fire and Queen brought to the world. There's nothing left to burn. The city of gods is covered in ashes in the distance, just like Lothric and all the other great kingdoms that once hosted gods. And the boss fight, it is not the most difficult encounter. You can make the fight especially easier with a greatsword since the posture break is incredibly easy to track. But it is a cinematic masterpiece. His attacks are so smooth and satisfying to track. As he is jumping around, one moment he hits you with an elegant slash, next his primal Dark Soul forces him to do series of savage swings. When he is wounded, he stops holding back the corruption. He's fighting with all he has got. Unlike a noble knight of Anor Londo or any other knight, his fighting style is full of strategy that puts his survival ahead of his looks. He swaps between crossbow and greatsword, he conceals himself by releasing the souls of his former victims. Gale survived countless battles and lived longer than anyone else in Dark Souls. He was a fighter from the beginning to the end of time, and his boss fight shows how he managed all that. Gale is a flawless character with incredible lore, arena soundtrack and boss fight. From Software games are a form of art. Compared to many soulless AAA games out there, you feel the ambition in every corner of Lands Between. Each area has a unique feeling and each area carries a unique art direction that feeds from the lore of its inhabitants. When it comes to bosses, every single major boss is a separate piece of artwork, and I believe Midra shines in the art direction of bosses. He is the major boss of the most horrifying part of Land of Shadows. He has faced unspeakable horrors and he has been in an internal fight with the chaos for way too long. You approach this helpless old man inside a hostile, ruined mansion. You witness the horrors of frenzied flame firsthand. When the fight starts, Midra isn't simply fighting, but he is dancing in the battlefield. His moves are so smooth and satisfying to react to. His soundtrack has samples of depressive melodies of frenzied merchants. His music and his existence is a rebellion against the gods living under the golden rays of Erdtree. He is definitely not a difficult boss, but his moveset reminds me of the Dark Souls 3 bosses. Fight is simple yet so much fun. He receives a slight power up as he is close to defeat, but his encounter always keeps perfect balance. His moves are so elegant and entertaining. As long as you figure the rhythm, you will always be in control. As an optional boss, Midra doesn't try to outshine the main bosses, but with his limited role in the DLC, he is one of the best bosses of Elden Ring. Bale comes quite close to becoming the greatest dragon boss, but I still like Midir a bit more. If I was ranking them, I would say both dragons are easily 9 out of 10, but I will go with Midir. Midir's setting is quite impressive. It basically starts from Dark Souls 1 and ends in the third game. He is the descendant of ancient dragons, he is raised by gods of Anor Londo and he is forced to protect Anor Londo by consuming the darkness. Years of exposure to Abyss corrupts him, but even in his dire situation, he senses the darkness within you and he challenges you in order to protect the Divine Family. Back when I first played Ring City in 2017, I didn't really like Midir all that much. He was running around too much, he had too much health, it wasn't a fun experience. But over the years I played Ring City like a billion times and I can say as long as you fight Midir the intended way, he is one of the best bosses in the franchise. If you stay in front of Midir all the time and face the dragon head on, he won't really run around all that much. In fact, it is one of the most satisfying to track bosses in the series. I mean, look at 40sex. If you're a melee build, the entire fight is just you staring at his feet. If you're into that, if you're into staring at a lizard's feet for 5 minutes, I guess I'm happy for you, but I will skip that, thanks. Similarly, in Seed the Scaleless fight, you can't see anything other than his tails. But Midir is different. As long as you are in the correct spot, you have a smooth cinematic fight where you can clearly see all of Midir's model and animations. Midir is difficult yet fair. No attack will catch you off guard as long as you are cautious. There are some moments his fire breath becomes too difficult to avoid based on your position, but overall Midir is a fun, fair boss fight which visually looks stunning. The way he spreads his torn wings, his laser attack, his flight, everything looks way ahead of its time. Along with Bale, it is definitely one of the best bosses ever made. I know Gandhi is not like the other bosses in this list, but hear me out. Gandhi is not the most popular boss in From Software history, okay, but he does a lot of things much better than most of the other bosses. He comes in two forms, the tutorial version and the late game encounter. I will talk about both, but he is mainly in the list thanks to his true version. Tutorial Gandhi is easily the best in its own category. Asylum Demon barely moves around. Last Giant has like 4 different attacks. Soldier of Godric, well, it hurts me to say something bad about God, Soldier of Rick, but come on, he disguises himself as a regular soldier, so what do you expect? Gandhi, on the other hand, is a properly made boss fight. Even as a tutorial encounter, he has so many different moves that are quite intimidating for a new player. He kicks you in the face, he kicks you in the nuts, he beats you up in all kind of different ways. His attacks are scary, he moves around quite a bit, and he is also faster than a regular tutorial boss. But here's the cool part, despite the flashy moveset, tutorial Gandhi is extremely easy to read and react to. So he serves as a great training encounter without losing its fighting style. When you fight this guy as a new player, by the time you beat it, you already know what to expect from the upcoming area. But tell me, what could you possibly learn from Soldier of Godric or Grafted Scion? Nothing. Anyways, his true form, Champion Gandhi, is something else. You encounter him in a spooky version of Firelink Shrine. He was supposed to be the champion who will link the fire and save humankind for another cycle, but he disappears and his absence leaves the world vulnerable to the undead curse. This is his story on the surface level. Now towards the endgame you face Gandhi quite close to his prime. Even though there's a possibility he spent millennia locked in this void, he still doesn't hold back. His first phase is quite similar to the tutorial encounter, only he is slightly stronger and faster this time. Second phase is where the fun begins. Unlike many other bosses, he doesn't have a flashy, over-the-top transition. He is just angry now. He becomes incredibly aggressive, he attacks non-stop with barely any openings. But of course, once you learn his moveset, boss fight only becomes more and more fun. He can be parried, which allows for some interesting strategies, but yeah, overall Champion Gandhi is a fun boss fight, and his tutorial version is once again the best tutorial boss From Software has ever made. You can't have a true Souls game without a Dex lady. Sister Frida, Malenia, Emma, and Lady Maria might be the best of them. One of the first hunters sitting motionless in a clock tower, her arena isn't the most over-the-top location in a Souls game, but the simplicity fits perfectly to Maria's encounter. Atmosphere is perfect and her soundtrack is a masterpiece. Her boss fight isn't as difficult as Sister Frida or Malenia's fight, but it is so satisfying nonetheless. Entire encounter feels like a duel between two equals rather than a boss fight. Attacks are fun to dodge yet challenging enough to create a sweet form of difficulty. She also has a simple yet cinematic phase transition. First power up comes when she stabs herself. Now her moveset is different and her reach is drastically improved. With a single mistake, you can find yourself in a difficult to recover situation. Close to the end of her fight, she receives her final power-up. In this last phase of the fight, her extended reach is followed by a delayed burst of flames. With this power-up, she is quite similar to the second phase of Abyss Watchers, but she is much bigger of a threat. From start to finish, her boss fight is well balanced and well telegraphed. In this day and age, with Sekiro and Elden Ring, Lady Maria might not be the most complex and detailed boss out there, but she is still one of the best bosses in Bloodborne. Godfrey was my favorite boss in the base game of Elden Ring. While exploring Lands Between, you hear about this legendary figure, first Elden Lord who has defeated every other faction and conquered the Badlands. Despite being a human just like the main character, he ascended and became a legend every demigod in Lands Between looked up to. Now you walk through that mist before Erdtree and he is there holding Morgoth. In a land every single person hated omens, Godfrey is the reason Morgoth and all the others were given another chance. Once Godfrey defeats the champion who has slain his sons, he can meet Marika once more and help her ascend to true divinity so that together they can take down the outer gods. You are a boss fight to Godfrey as much as he is a boss fight to you. Marika guides you both to meet in battle. Setting is already amazing and it only gets better with the boss fight. Godfrey has one of the most action-packed fights in the entire game. He almost never stops attacking, but in between each move there's a small opening. Whenever I failed Godfrey's encounter, it was because I ran out of stamina without realizing. You can be in action non-stop without any idle time. His attacks are mostly axe swings and heavy stomps, but the animations and timings offer such a wide variety that the fight never feels repetitive. In the second phase, Godfrey removes his shackles. He didn't part with Sarosh even when he was slain in Badlands, so you are the first person in thousands of years to see Godfrey fight with all of his might. He becomes faster, he does one grab attack after another. If you make a mistake, you will easily find yourself in the endless loop of healing, taking damage, and then healing again. Godfrey's encounter is designed and balanced in such a great way that even if you challenge him at level 1 or level 700, you can still have a similar experience. It is a difficult but fair, fun fight no matter how you look at it. Artorias walked so other humanoid bosses could run, or something like that. Artorias inspired so many encounters and he set the standards for a lot of future From Software bosses. Ornstein and Smoke fall slightly behind Demon Prince duo for me, but it is still one of the best duo fights ever made. Even Elden Ring failed to make a gang fight that can match Ornstein and Smoke. Genichiro is not a difficult boss, but he is one of the most satisfying bosses to fight against. Boss fight basically turns Sekiro into a rhythm game, and if you try hard enough, you can even beat the boss blindfolded just by listening. Ivory King is possibly my favorite Dark Souls 2 boss. I love their lore so much that I have to talk about Ivory King once every 2 videos. Great lore, greatest King and Souls franchise, amazing boss arena, entertaining unique fight, it does everything right. Seriously, Ivory King needs more praise. Bale is the greatest dragon boss after Midir. Cinematic boss fight, amazing atmosphere, beautiful moveset, impressive background, overall, curse you Bale, you're a great boss. For a long time, Nameless King held the title of being the hardest boss in Dark Souls 3, and rightfully so. Nameless King was a prototype for Elden Ring bosses, just like how Prime Radahn is a prototype for the next Souls game. He delays his attacks, some of his animations alter the timing of upcoming hits, and his rapid movement disengages the target lock. But Nameless King wasn't just a challenging boss, he was also a fun one. There isn't a lot of lore about him scattered across Lordran, but he still has a rich and interesting history. He is the oldest son of Gwyn. He was a ruthless god of war who, despite possessing only a fraction of Gwyn's Lord Soul, still held the potential of surpassing the god of sunlight. Eventually, he saw a future his father couldn't comprehend. He figured he could restore the natural order and create a world for lords, humans and dragons. But for his treachery, he was erased from history, all of his statues were destroyed and his name was forgotten. But even after his exile, his followers continued serving his covenant. Together with his allies, he lived in the highest peaks of Lordran, away from Gwyn's corrupted world. His setting is rich and interesting. The former god of war brings peace to all the factions and gathers all of them under one banner. All the dragon hunters and dragons join his cause to build a world for everyone. You meet Nameless King in one of the best looking boss areas. You are at the heart of a brewing storm. You challenge the former god of war in his house. First phase isn't too difficult. Storm King has some tricky flame attacks, but mostly he leaves himself vulnerable with long breath attacks. Once Storm King is beaten, an incredible cinematic shows more about the Nameless King. Right before he absorbs the powers of his friend, his small hand movement shows how much he cares about Storm King. Second phase is where the real fight begins. Nameless King has a great number of unique attacks. Based on your distance, he responds with so many different moves. He can quickly dash, he can send a shockwave, he can hit you with lightning. One thing that makes Nameless King difficult and also a lot of fun is the variety in his moveset. Fight never feels repetitive and there's always something new that can catch you off guard. The short delay in between each combo makes the encounter smooth and almost flawless. Nameless King is a true example of a well-made boss fight, challenging yet entirely fair and well balanced. Before Sister Frida, Gale and Midir joined, Nameless King was the peak boss fight in Dark Souls 3, and even in such difficult competition, Nameless King doesn't fall behind all the great bosses of the franchise. Well, this should do it for today. If you liked the video and if you want to support my channel, go ahead and watch another one of my videos. It helps a lot, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.